I will lie on a cold metal table. A sheet will cover my still, naked body. It is a body that no one other than my husband has ever seen. It will be tranquil in the room. 4 holy women of the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, will wash their hands, dry them with paper towels, and pat their splayed palms with talcum powder. This helps to slide on the 2 sets of latex gloves that they will wear. In a quiet murmur, each one will say the designated blessings for the task ahead. No words other than brief instructions will be said, and so will begin the preparations for my burial. A couple of small padded cotton bags will be placed in the coffin as a pillow for my weary head that will sleep for a very long time. The women will remove any vestiges of death's bureaucracy, a name tag from the hospital, perhaps remaining bandages or tubes. And as I lie flat, one woman will stand on my right side, another on my left, and the third behind my head, gently supporting it lest it rolls. The 4th woman will ensure that things are done correctly and pass relevant instruments to the others at the right time. 3 women will delicately lift the sheet, stand behind it, and the 4th will pull at a strategically placed shower head and spray me with water from my head to my toes as I lie on my back. A vat of rainwater is perched on a specially designed contraption above this metal table. And after I've been physically cleaned with the tap water, I will be ritually cleaned with the rainwater, the same water that filled the mikveh, the ritual bath that was used every month during my marriage, except for when I was pregnant and now after menopause. Once again, 3 women will take the sheet off me and stand behind it. The woman standing at my head will release a lever that will tip the water onto my head. Holding onto the handle of the lever, she will walk slowly the length of my body, ensuring that the rainwater spills out of the vat and covers all of me. And where there is no machine, buckets of rainwater are filled and then emptied over the body. A short Hebrew prayer will be said, closing with the words, Tahara, 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 pure, pure, pure. This is part of the introduction to my book about the Chevra Kadisha. And what I try to do is give you a flavor for what happened. Yep, I'll show. Thank you. I'll show everybody in a moment. Is give you a sense of what happens during the Chevra Kadisha process. Some of you may already be familiar with it. Some of you it'll be completely new to you. So please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and I'll respond as we go along. And what I'd like to do is share with you a little bit about why I joined the Chevra, but also some of the sort of technicalities and some of the issues involved, and a little bit about personal history as well. So I'm going to share the screen. So this is the front cover of the book. When I'll close this part. When I joined the Chevra, why did I decide to join the Chevra? And I'll tell you why. Basically, I passed the age at which my mother had died. And I often wondered, well, it was only at that point that I thought, who buried her? I never really thought about it very much. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. I live in London now. That's a whole other circuitous story. But it really struck me that why I've been very lucky to live past the age of my mother. And I somehow wanted to start to pay it back. I'd reached a significant birthday as well. And I thought, what can I give myself as a birthday gift? And I decided that I wanted to give myself the gift of joining the Burial Society. And I mentioned that my opening, that the last 3 words were Tahara, Tahara, Tahara. Those words mean, pure is not the best translation, but that's what we use. And I think to myself, the ritual puts me in this reflective mood. And as I dress the woman in her burial shrouds, I wonder about her life. What was important to her? Her dreams. Did she have a happy life, a difficult life? Lying there, this woman is stripped of her history. Was she like the praiseworthy Eshet Chayil? That's the woman we praise in a lot of Jewish prayers. Did she rise while it was still nighttime, give food to her household and a ration to her maids? Did she open her mouth with wisdom and have the teaching of kindness on her tongue? And what will her absence mean to those she left behind? And how will I be remembered? So often when I'm participating in this Chevra Kadisha, where there are 4 women in a room together surrounding a body and getting it prepared ritually, I am thinking, who was this person? Because we do it for people anonymously. We don't know the person that we're preparing for burial. And there is something very giving in that, and also something very humbling, that we just don't know who they are. We don't know the family. If you're in a small community, it might happen that you do know, but generally you don't know the person. But then it makes me wonder, well, how will I be remembered when, hopefully it'll be many years to come, how will I be remembered when I'm sort of lying there on that metal slab? What I thought I would do is give you a little bit of a flavour of what happens. And I'm using a little bit of art and what was called sort of material culture, I guess, and demonstrations. Now, there's a set of 16 paintings that were made in Prague in 1772. You can Google it for the whole set of images, because one of the important things in there are many aspects to Jewish burial, but one of them is being buried in specific shrouds. Now, a couple of thousand of years ago, in the Jewish community, there were very elaborate funerals. People got dressed, like people were dressed for their funeral and in fancy clothes and jewelry, and they were buried that way. But what would happen is that there were people who couldn't afford to do that, and they left their deceased relatives on the road. And it's written about in the Talmud, in one of the books of Jewish law, that this is what happened. So one of the rabbis at the time, named Rabbi Gamliel, said he put down a ruling that this must stop. Everybody must be buried the same. We all came the same way. We're all going to go the same way, and we have to level this out. And the idea of shrouds, of simple shrouds, was instituted at that point. And they're called, in Hebrew, they're called tachrechim. Somebody's from Israel, so some of you will know some Hebrew. And they are very simple. They're sort of white linen, cotton. There's no buttons, no zips. And I'll show you in a moment a sample. And the idea was that everybody's just buried in these very simple clothes, and there's a face mask as well. So there were a series of paintings that were made in the 1700s to honor the people of the burial society in Prague. At the time, Prague had the largest Jewish community in Europe at the time. And some of you may have visited Prague and seen the old Jewish cemetery and the Jewish synagogues. It's quite a tourist site there now. And it was a well-known community and burial society. So this is a photo of the making of the shrouds. So you can see, interestingly, I haven't seen pictures before with men making them as well. And just to clarify also, women will prepare women's bodies for burial, and men will prepare male bodies for burial. Part of this series, here was a photo of painting of a man on his deathbed, being of his widow and child to the side. And I'm not sure if he's actually died at that point, or perhaps they are saying special prayers as somebody leaves this world. There's a series of confessions that if you're conscious enough to say them, you're said with a group of people. So you have this picture, and then this is a painting of the body being led to the burial. Now, interestingly, he's not in a coffin, and I don't know why that is. Maybe the coffin is waiting for him. Certainly nowadays, when you take somebody to be buried, certainly in England or outside of Israel, I believe in Israel it is slightly different for most people, except for soldiers, where they're buried directly into the ground. But in England, for example, you would be buried, the coffin would be taken to the ground. So maybe things were different 300 years ago. So what do these shrouds look like? This is the basic sort of kit. You'll see up the top there's a head covering. There's also a face mask that somebody's buried in. There's sheets that are used to sort of cover the body as we're preparing the body for burial, because there's a very strong sense of their modesty should be preserved even in death. So when we're sort of cleaning them, whatever part of the body we're not cleaning, we cover up with a sheet. A shirt is put on, the michnasan pants, and there's a kittel here, a robe, not a dressing gown, like a long shirt. And there's also an apron that is tied around the waist. It isn't in this picture. Now, the men are wrapped in a talit, which is their prayer shawl that some of you may have seen if you visited a synagogue. But the prayer shawl is cut. There's like a symbolic tear, and women are not wrapped in a synagogue in a talit. Now, I wanted to tell you very briefly about. So this still goes on. I mean, this is, we do it on Sunday mornings. Usually is my turn, and so it's the same clothes that have been used for quite a long time, for hundreds of years now. And we usually get them, they're made in America or made in Israel, but there's a group of women in Oslo, and I thought it was such a moving vignette that I wanted to share it with you. There's a group of women in Oslo where there's a tiny, tiny Jewish community. And in fact, there they probably do know each person that they're burying, where they make the tachrichim themselves. And there was a piece about it. And to just show here, they used to sit, this woman, this tradition, London is the name of the woman, they used to sit in silence and sew, London said. The air was solemn and respectful, with no frivolous chit-chat. Before the war, she's obviously referring to World War II, the sewing took place in secrecy. One of the oldest living members of the circle, named Ruth Goldstein, recalls that when she was a girl, there were times when her grandmother would not allow her and her siblings to play inside. This is how she learned that the ladies are sewing. And then the rabbi actually commented, the value of keeping the tradition going in a small community like ours cannot be underestimated. It is so intimate. We know who we sew for. We prepare tachrichim for our aunts, friends, mothers, and fathers. And most poignantly, sometimes we even sew them for ourselves. So as I said, usually in a big community, they'd be sort of shipped in, you'd get a bulk order, but in a very small place, they've chosen to make them for themselves and handed on this tradition and kept the tradition alive, which I thought was very beautiful. I wanted to share with you a few paintings by a woman, contemporary paintings by a woman named Karen Benioff. I think she's in Los Angeles actually, and she writes how maybe 2010 she did these paintings. So 10, 15 years ago, she'd never heard of the Chevra Kadisha. She belongs to a Jewish community, but she's not observant, hadn't really engaged with Jewish rituals. And then she heard about this idea of a Chevra Kadisha, very talented artist. And so she has done a series of paintings and drawings. And I just wanted to share them with you. And there's lots of them, and you can see her website. This represents the washing of the body. You can see the woman's holding a bucket. I mentioned a sort of like a big machine that washes the body where I'm involved. But actually, if you don't have that, then you can use a number of buckets to cover, because there's a certain amount of water you're meant to use. So you use a few buckets to do that. This is a painting of covering the sheet, where you are, to preserve the woman's modesty, or the person or the male modesty. And this is very evocative as well. You can see that the woman has been dressed in the simple shrouds that I mentioned, and they're now tying this bonnet around her head. And in the final picture that I've got here, the woman is completely dressed, and the face mask is over her face, and the bonnet and everything's on. And I assume, and in that picture, it looks to me that they're actually lifting her into the coffin, because this sheet that's draping, it's in the coffin, sort of draping over her, because once she's put in, that sheet that's draping sort of underneath her will be draped on top of her. So I thought these were very evocative images that I wanted to share with you. Now, just to give you a flavor, a lot of this long history of Jewish art and Jewish artifacts, that's what I was looking for. And I just wanted to share a couple of them with you. Now, when we get the body ready, we comb the person's hair, and it's like a plastic comb from the chemist. But it seems that in the beginning of the second half of the 19th century, it seems they either used heavy combs like this, or this one was created as a gift to the Holy Society, the Chevra Kadisha. I don't know the answer, but I've never seen anything like it that's contemporary. So I thought it was very interesting, just to a little bit of a curiosity to show you. And and it's the ritual comb of the burial society, and it's engraved here in the middle here. It's engraved with words that it was a gift of Fega Siegel in memory of her husband and son Yitzhak Siegel. And these are, yeah, just a symbolic, not symbolic, I can't think of the word, sort of in memoriam of her beloved. And the other thing to share with you, nowadays, when somebody is buried outside of Israel, we put a little bit of the land of Israel in the coffin. So we're often asked if any of you are going to Israel to bring back a bag of earth. There is this idea that if a Jew can't be buried in their homeland, then a little bit of the homeland will be sent abroad and buried with them in another country. Now, what I've in the, I think it was I can't see the year here, the early 1900s, bags of earth were from Israel were collected together from the Mount of Olives, you can see there, and they were sent abroad, and then they were placed as pillows under somebody's head in their coffin. I'm not aware of that. It certainly doesn't happen in London. Maybe there's a community in America that does that. I'm not sure. But I thought it was quite an interesting curiosity. And so that you would have this pillow resting your head on the land of Israel. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. And I just want to, are you able, I hope you've heard me. Just seen that note. If there are any questions or comments, I'm going to sort of shift gear in a moment if people wanted to ask anything for clarity. If not, that's fine. Nope. Okay. So as I mentioned, I got into the Chevra Kadisha and I volunteer. It's mainly it's all volunteers. There's a couple of paid people at the grave site. The grave diggers are paid, but those of us in the community volunteer our time. As I said, I volunteer on a Sunday generally because I'm working during the week. Other people, depends on your commitments. The process takes 45 minutes to an hour for each person, and usually you would do, or depends on what's needed, but you would never. The most I've done at one time is 3. Yeah, 3. It's usually one or two because it's quite physical, draining work, but it's also there's an emotional component as well, obviously. So I got into it because of my own. Started with thinking about finding something meaningful I could do for myself as an older person, but also recognizing that after I'd passed the age when my mother had died, that I wanted to sort of honor her in that way. I experienced quite a bit of loss. My mother died suddenly, and my father died suddenly, and then that was when I was quite young. And 5 years ago, my younger brother also died. So, and these were all sudden deaths, and everybody's. And then we'll get to what happened after that in a moment. But everyone's obvious experience is different, and the notion of being ready for death is very different when it's a sudden death to somebody where you've had time to prepare. Nothing ever really prepares you, but I think there is a different reaction when it's a sudden death, and at least a few months, a few weeks to prepare for death. Somebody's recommended another book on the Chevra Kadisha. That's great. It's good to share those resources. So I want to tell you a little bit of personal history. I'm going to go back to share for a moment. Where are we? We did all these pictures. Hold on. Right. I'd like to tell you a little bit about these two pictures. So this picture here on my left is a picture of my mother, who was born in Slovakia in 1937 and spent her war years in hiding. She came to Australia in 1948, 49 as a 11, 12-year-old young girl, and this photo is just in Slovakia just before she got to Australia. She didn't really speak very much about her experiences. And I don't know how much she remembered, to be honest, or chose. I'm sure she remembered, but I'm not sure she chose what she chose to remember or chose to talk about. But she was in hiding, so from, I suppose, 42 to 45, she was in hiding. But she never, as I said, really very rarely talked about it. But just hold that thought for a moment. This fellow on my right here is a man named Naftali First. He's my mother's first cousin. My grandmother, so my mother's mother and his mother were sisters. He now lives in Haifa and just had his 90th birthday. He, for the last 15, 20 years, has been going back to Slovakia and Germany, Hungary a little bit as well, and Germany itself, talking about his experiences. He's been on the radio. He's had a movie made about him. He was one of, he survived Auschwitz, but he was in several concentration camps, and he was one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz. And he's, I don't want to say famous, but he's well known in Holocaust sort of educator circles. He also has a website about his experiences, and a movie was made about him. The reason I mention that is that the reason I mentioned it is one day Naftali gets an email from somebody saying that they found his address on a website and that they live in this house, and they found a photo, and they found this particular photo, and they don't know from this house, and they noticed that he lived in this house. So they sent this email to him and said, do you know who this person is? So Naftali contacts me, and we realize it's my mother, and we realize that this is the family that had made contact with us to say they found this photo and they wanted to make contact because they wanted to learn more about what happened. These were the grandchildren of the people who saved my mother, who hid her. So it's a very long security story, but to cut a long story short, I met Naftali. My mother had died by this point. I met Naftali in Slovakia, and we drove to visit. This is the house where she was hidden, and this is the daughter of the woman who hid my mother. She's since died. This photo is from 2015, 2016. She's since died. Through a long process, we were able to get this family recognized as righteous Gentiles, which is an accolade, an award given by the Israeli government for those non-Jews who did something courageous to save Jewish people during the Holocaust. I then went, so they have an award, a day on the International Holocaust Memorial Day, which is on the 27th of January, and around Europe in every different country, the Israeli embassy hosts an event for those people during that year that have been awarded righteous Gentiles. So I went in, it was in 2019, so it took us about 4 years to get them recognized. There was quite a lot of bureaucracy, but also you had to sort of have the right papers. And I went in 2019, and I wrote about it in an article, which I then sort of adapted for my book. And as I wrote, scanning the room of the rescuers' descendants in Bratislava, I wondered, could they too be harboring inherited trauma? Knowing of the bravery, risks, and sacrifices made by their parents and grandparents, are the next generation at risk of self-doubt and insecurity? Are they paralyzed by fear? Are they prone to doubt, existential doubt about their mission in this world? And could the burden to be good be too heavy to bear? Have they inherited the genome of kindness and altruism that will ensure their actions are all ethical and moral, no matter the circumstances? Some of you who may be interested in this field or familiar with it will have heard of the notion of second-generation Holocaust survivors, so the children of Holocaust survivors. So my mother was in hiding and my father was in Auschwitz and also went to Australia after the war. They both happened to be from Slovakia, but they met in Australia and married, had a family, and got on with their lives. But there is this notion that children of Holocaust survivors have a sort of sense of trauma and a sense of having to be really very overachieving to sort of make up for to their parents, because their parents are filled with, why did I survive? How do I make meaning out of my life? And that is often passed on to the children of survivors. Not everybody, and it manifests in different ways, but there is this phenomena that is discussed a lot in the psychological literature. And the truth is, until this event, I had never thought about the children of those rescuers. I thought about children of Nazis. And in fact, I have been to workshops where they bring together children of Nazis, or grandchildren actually of Nazis, and children of survivors, and the issues that actually there were a couple of children of Nazis, grandchildren of Nazis have, and about their family history and that trauma, psychological trauma, and children of survivors. But I hadn't thought about those who were the children of people who rescued Jews. And I wondered to myself, could the burden to be good to be too heavy to bear? Because if they know that their parents or their grandparents did this tremendously brave thing, tremendously moral thing, are they burdened with this sense of, can I ever be as good enough as my parents, my grandparents? And I wondered about that. And I don't have an answer, but it was through this meeting these people that it made me think about it. And so it was something that I wanted to share in the book as a thought to consider. And as I write in the book, and I talk about my parents' experiences, but also my interaction with some of these issues around Holocaust Memorial, that I realized that when my parents, my grandparents, and millions of others who died in the various concentration camps, there was no Chevra Kadisha to tend to their deaths, no cemetery or polished tombstone to visit on their yahrzeit, which is the annual memorial ceremony, day of memorial. So it's sort of embarrassing when I think about it that it didn't occur until I was an adult and started thinking about this a lot more. I realized there was no gentle tendering of the person's body. People were gassed, they were burnt. And I've been to Auschwitz, some of you in this group may have been as well. And it's a very strange, it's very sanitized, it's a very strange thing. And it occurred to me that not only was life taken away, but the opportunity to have the mourning rights that we all take for granted, and the opportunity to grieve was taken away. And this legacy finds mass graves still unmarked to this day across Europe at a children's park on the edges of the Babi Yar ravine, a short train ride from downtown Kiev. Now, I have been to Kiev many years before what's going on now, and you literally just take the underground train, I don't know, 20 minutes from central Kiev, and you're in Babi Yar. It's quite a sort of, where there was a terrible massacre, and it's quite bizarre. There has been a memorial built since then, which was destroyed by the Russians fairly early on in the war. But this sort of dealing with the long-term effects of the Holocaust experience, I think has many facets to it. And in the context of death, I've just touched on a couple of things. But I wanted to share with you something much cheerier. I just said now that we have a memorial, the yahrzeit, the annual day for remembering. And there are different customs. There are prayers that are said. People might get together for a family dinner. Everyone will do, everyone will do something different. I wanted to share with you the will of a famous writer named Sholem Aleichem. Some of you may have heard of him. The play Fiddler on the Roof is based on his milkman stories, and his name was Rabinowitz, surname. His real name was Rabinowitz, surname, but his name was Sholem Aleichem, which in Hebrew means peace be to you, or it's a greeting you say to somebody, Sholem Aleichem. And he says on his yahrzeit that he wants his remaining son, if they're so minded, to say Kaddish after me. Now, Kaddish is the Jewish Hebrew prayer of mourning that is said during the first year of somebody's death. But if he says, and then once a year after they've died. And he says, but if they don't want to do that, or they've got no time for it, or it's against their religious convictions, they can be absolved from this duty. Only if they all come together with my daughters and my grandchildren and with good friends and read my will and select one of my stories, one of my really joyous ones, and read it out aloud in whatever language they understand best, and let my name be mentioned by them with laughter rather than not be mentioned at all. And I thought this was just a wonderful celebration of a person's life. And the reason I've shared it, because he's a well-known character, and some of you will have I'm sure all of you have heard of Fiddler on the Roof, and some of you will have seen it, and some of you will have read the original stories upon which it's based. But this was from 1916, and this is part of his will, was on the front cover of the New York Times. About 100,000, over 100,000 people attended his funeral. He was such in New York, he was such a well-loved, well-regarded character. And I just thought that was a wonderful thing to share with you. So I mentioned that unfortunately my parents died young and died suddenly, and the truth is I'd always blamed their poor health on their Holocaust experience. They didn't have such good health, and it sort of made sense that they didn't have good health, and then they unfortunately died quite young. But then about 5 years ago, my brother died. He was on the treadmill in the gym and literally dropped dead. You hear about those stories, they really do happen. That was obviously a huge shock to me. He was a healthy person. It transpired that there was a genetic issue. I went to Australia from London for his funeral. I stayed for a couple of weeks. I came back, and then I straight away went to the doctor. I was referred to a heart surgeon, and about 2 weeks later, I was under the knife having a quadruple bypass. So it was like quite a sort of staggering set of events for me. And that was, he died in 2017. So a couple of months later, October 2017, I had a quadruple bypass, and I'm absolutely fine. But of course, I make sure I have 3 girls in their 20s, and I'm a little obsessed now about their healthy heart issues, but we're dealing with that. And I think, and maybe it's something you've talked about during the day, the sort of death and how you make meaning out of it. And I write here, since my heart operation, I feel an even greater burden to make meaning of my life. To squander this gift would insult my brother's memory, for his sacrifice gave me the window of opportunity to lengthen my days. And while I have always tried to make each day matter, I have never before been more assiduously committed to doing so. Now, I write that, but I have to tell you, I waste a lot of time as well. I think we're all pretty human, but it is I have this, like, I've got to do important things. I've got to make every day matter, every minute matter. But I can assure you, I waste a lot of time. But I'm working on it. The Talmud, this large book of Jewish law, L-O-R-E, law stories, and L-A-W, law, legal work, suggests that the world was created for my sake. There is a task in this world that only I and I alone can carry out. That thought troubles me, of course. How could it be that the world hangs in the balance according to the preordained task that I must fulfill? And what if I can't work out what that task is? And if the smile I gave the lonely person I walked past in the park this morning, if that was my task, then my hours left are numbered. And I often wonder this, and perhaps I'm sure you all do as well. What is it that's unique that you're going to contribute to the world? And how do you work out what that is? So I wanted to also, in my book, so my book talks about the Chevra Kadisha. There's sort of more explanation, a bit of the history of it. It talks about Jewish mourning rites, which is the week of the Shiva, which Shiva standing for 7 days. So we sit at home for 7 days. And then there's a period of mourning for a month, and then for a year. There are different stages, and there are certain prayers that are said. So I talk about my own experience of doing that, and then sort of raise a lot of other issues. And one of those issues is the afterlife, which I'm not, as I say, I'm not so worried about my own afterlife, but who knows what's going to be. But I do think about the life after I'm gone, and how does one prepare one's family for that life after? What sort of memory bank have I created for them? How will they remember me? What have I helped them become resilient? And what was my responsibility about their life after? Now I have a lot of stuff. We all have a lot of stuff. And it's the books, the clothes, the photos, gadgets, jewelry. I've started giving them little bits of jewelry, actually. I don't have a lot of it's sort of junky stuff, but I just want them to have it now. I'm sure you've all got, I've got articles that I haven't read, notebooks, drafts of articles I haven't finished writing, passports, post-it notes, a whole range of things. So there's an element of clearing up your stuff, but there's also your digital files, how do you want to be remembered on social media? How do you curate your digital life? And I think that's something people need to be thinking about quite a bit. And where are the passwords that your family are going to need? And what's the password to all the passwords? There's a few people have now, there are websites dedicated to this stuff. It's actually very interesting. There's sort of businesses that have evolved to look at all of that. So it's something that I've started to think about quite a bit. Not done enough about it as I should have, but it's certainly something that troubles me. And it troubles me because I feel responsible for the, as I said, the life after. And just to sort of bring things to a conclusion before I open it up for a bit of conversation. The book I've written is short, but what I've also done is put a series of questions at the end of the book, because I wanted to give people, I wanted the book to be like a call to action, to give people a trigger or a positive trigger, a catalyst, that's a better word, for talking about death and dying. Now, you've all come together voluntarily to speak about death and dying. You're motivated to come to a whole day about it. So you're perhaps not the right audience for this series of questions. This is more, I guess, for people who perhaps are a little nervous about talking about it, or maybe you are the right audience and it'll give you a little bit of a structure. So I've put questions that sort of match the chapters in the book. And so this is really about joining a Hevre, because a lot of people are quite interested, but they're not quite sure how to do it, what to do. This is about Kaddish, what I mentioned before. In Jewish tradition, there's a series of rituals that we go through. This is more about confronting illness, and either your own illness or somebody else's illness, and have the impact. There's a bit there on death in the pandemic. The Chevra Kadisha, we had to do burials very differently during the pandemic. And the Shiva, the sort of period of the week where you visit families, you couldn't do that. And I'm sure you all experienced a variation of some sort of difficulty during the pandemic. And I suspect some of you may have lost loved ones, and I'm sorry for that, but we all had to confront that death in the pandemic. And what are the lessons we've learned from there? And the last sort of section was what I just talked about before, life after death. The Swedes have this concept of death cleaning, which is sort of getting your house ready, but also being very clear about what you want to give away, what messages you want to leave for people. I've read about people having a sort of, particularly who are ill or know that they're going to die fairly soon, having bringing people together, having their funeral before, with them there, they're living, I think they call it a living funeral. So they're there and able to say their goodbyes to everybody, the digital footprint that I mentioned. So that really just gives you a little bit of a flavor of what interests me around death. There are some also a few more specific Jewish things in the book, which I haven't discussed today because it's a much more general audience. But there's also some general issues around, and I think the sort of universality of death is, despite our different rituals, our different customs, and even within Judaism, there are different customs. Not everybody follows these customs. There's a lot to unpack. So I'll just leave you, if anybody's interested, you are welcome to email me for a copy of the book, or Fishburne Books in the UK selling it. If you're in Israel, Pomerantz Books in Jerusalem has copies, and in the States you can get them through, there's a bookshop on eBay. I've had Amazon's, I haven't been able to work with Amazon. I think Amazon UK, somebody's doing it for me, but it's been a bit tricky. So distribution's been a bit of an issue, but if anybody's interested, you can certainly write to me, and happy to answer anyone personally. Right, so I'm going to stop sharing. I know I've got 45 minutes, I've got another 4 minutes. If anybody has questions, comments that they'd like to, I'm looking, oh, right. I don't know, Tony Berkovic is not a relative, daughter of Lionel, no. But Port Douglas is beautiful. He was from Melbourne, I didn't know him. No. Somebody, Ali Amana, is saying she was involved in the Chevra Kadisha. Right, okay, I'll put the chat. Right. Okay, I'll put the material in the chat box as well. Thank you for your interest. Any questions? If people want to unmute, they can do that. Hold on, let me just copy this and put it in the chat box. Right, so I can't, can you see that if anybody has any queries?
So I welcome anyone to give not only questions, also reactions, comments, ideas, inspiration. Sally, you've done a wonderful job.
Oh, pleasure, thank you. Where are you all from different parts? Somebody's written in German, I don't know, and somebody's in Israel, and somebody's in Hungary, I heard from the conversation before.
That's right.
Right. The Christians have such traditions. I don't know, you'll have to ask some of the Christians in the group. Somebody's asked again, it's called Death Duties. Okay, I think if there are no, I've done my 45, I think I'm in the UK, yes, I'm in the UK, in London, in Golders Green, if anybody is familiar with that. There's a lot of taboo around, not taboo, I don't want to say taboo, the sort of, see, one of the things I wanted to do with the book and talking about giving these sort of talks is there's a lot of secrecy around the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, and understandably, it's not something that's talked about all the time, but I think we have to get a balance between talking about it respectfully and letting people know about it, and keeping it, I don't want to say secret, keeping it modestly. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. It doesn't have to be hidden. I just think it has to be dealt with respectfully, which I hopefully I've done in the book. That was, and the next generation of people need to know there's always a recruitment issue. In fact, I was very lucky. Somebody in Geneva saw it, the English edition, and he's responsible for Chevra Kadisha, and he was very complimentary and said, "Oh, I'm going to translate this into French because I want to use it as a recruitment tool to get more interest," which he then did, and he published it and sent it out to the community in Geneva, and he recruited half a dozen people. He was delighted. So that was really good. Yeah. There is also a Hebrew edition which is available, an audio vision. No, there isn't. What a great idea. I have, Danit, I can send it to you. I have a Hebrew PDF which is available, that's giving it away. If there are people here who would like the Hebrew, perhaps you can pass that on to them. Would that be all right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I'm not getting it printed in, I don't have a publisher in Hebrew, but it's been translated, but I'm not getting it printed up. So I'm just giving that away. And I'm doing it very much there is a small charge to the book, but it's sort of really the cover costs. It's sort of more a public service. No, the PDF's not in English. I've got it's only available as a hardback. Are you in the UK, Carol? Do you know where Carol is? Oh, right, New Jersey. Okay. Right. Any other questions or comments? Yes, in the States, you can get it through, there's the eBay link that I'll just copy that here. There's a bookstore called the Jewish Bookshop, and he can send it to you. He's on eBay. He does all his, it's all online. I think he's got a warehouse in Brooklyn. If you have trouble, be in touch on my email, and I can post you one here from the UK, but it'll be very expensive, the postage. Just trying to save you the postage costs. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Sally.
Pleasure.
It's
Okay.
a real, it's well done, well presented, and I really appreciate not only your time, I appreciate what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, well, have a good evening and a lovely Easter, Pesach, whatever spring season you're
Yes.
celebrating over the next
All
couple of
right.
weeks. All right, then. Shall I just leave then, Ganet?
Well, I will once again tell you my thanks
Okay.
and very much appreciate.